Welcome to Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. In our mini series of restarting Malaysia, we all know that the country is actually trying to reinvigorate the business communities yet again, trying to see what we can do in arresting the sliding economic numbers, including that of the rising unemployment figures. All this is happening right now, but we also need to try and see if we can focus a little bit about the corporates and the kind of direct impact that they bring about to communities that they operate in. Largely, we all know the alphabets surrounding these kind of efforts. Alphabets like CR, or corporate responsibility, or CSR, corporate social responsibility. These are the kind of bodies that are being created through foundations to actually assist the communities in trying to address the direct economic issues that they are bringing about, including that of real change to the community. So what better organization to speak of other than Yayasan Hasanah, one of the larger foundations that are in Malaysia. Joining me is the Trustee and Managing Director of Yayasan Hasanah, Puan Shahira Ahmed Bazari. How are you doing, Shahira?
Hi, Ibrahim. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, let's focus a little bit about Yayasan Hasanah. It was an independent grant-making foundation created a few years ago with Khazanah Nasional. Let's talk a little bit about how the foundation was set up and how this actually couples with the work that the government is trying to do.
Yeah, thank you. So you're right. We are the foundation of Khazanah Nasional. We were actually set up as an independent entity since 2015 and building on a lot of the corporate responsibility work prior to that Khazanah has been doing. And really, I think the thinking around setting up a national foundation alongside a sovereign fund like Khazanah Nasional is actually complementary to the entire role of nation building of organizations like Khazanah. So while Khazanah looks into commercial and economic development and growth, Yayasan Hasanah is looking at more social and environmental balances towards building our nation more holistically. So that's basically the sort of philosophy of setting up this foundation. And I think in the early days, the idea was also to ensure that the foundation remains sustainable, remains able to continue to do its work regardless of the sort of ups and downs of an economic cycle in that sense. And in the early days, you know, the foundation was set up with an endowment. So Alhamdulillah, you know, we are able to have some kind of sustainability. Of course, there's also ups and downs in our sector, but some kind of sustainability to continue to do long-term work in the social and environmental space.
Would you say that the funding comes 100% from Khazanah, or are there, divisions?
It is. So we started off with quite a sizable endowment by Khazanah, and we operate from the returns of that endowment on an annual basis. Only recently, I think during the COVID crisis, we have now partnered with the Ministry of Finance under the Prihatin stimulus package to also deploy funding to civil society organizations and social enterprises.
There are key stakeholders that you're working with, even before, not just about the Prihatin and Laksana punya efforts, but there are key figures and key parties that you work with, the civil societies that you speak of, the social enterprises that you speak of. If you can share with us some kind of direct impact that you have worked with them, some examples that maybe our viewers can learn from.
Yeah, great. So I just wanted to say earlier just now that, you know, this whole COVID-19 experience has shown the philanthropy and nonprofit sector at its best. Because if you look at how the sector has responded alongside corporations, alongside government initiatives in ensuring, you know, rapid response, and I think that's really quite important. And many of corporate foundations and corporate responsibility units of the private sector actually came together during this crisis. And you actually see, and I wanted to quote a McKinsey report recently on the scale of capital that has gone in just in the last sort of 70 days. More than 10.3 billion US dollars has gone in as at May 2020. So, you know, they provided speed in response. They looked at tackling inequality issues that got amplified during this time. As you could see, we're seeing quite a lot of that. And working with private sectors actually provided a bit of flexibility to government as well in terms of the kind of target beneficiaries or target vulnerable communities that if a government policy can't reach, but at least civil society and social enterprises and corporate foundations can reach, whether it's the migrant communities, stateless communities, and so on and so forth. So I think there's something useful there. You asked the question on partnerships that we've had with civil society. I mean, this is our business lah. We work very closely with civil society and social enterprises. I think one half of our work is grant giving or grant making to enable investments in the 5 areas that Hasanah is in, which is education, community development, environment, arts, and knowledge. But the other sort of responsibility that we have, and I think it's important for all corporate foundations to play a role in, is building the capacity of our civil society, bringing them up to sort of like 2.0, 3.0, and so on and so forth.
The thing is, before we talk about how you're building or empowering the civil societies further, I want to see the operational aspect of it, because when you say you work with corporates, wouldn't those corporates also have their own foundations and their own CSR arm? How do you guys, iron out the differences in terms of overlap to make sure that you guys serve the communities differently and in a way where it's most impactful by doing it together? How do you make sure that there's no redundancies there?
So I think that's a very pertinent and important point, and I think it requires a bit of a paradigm shift as well, because like I've been in the for-profit, I've been in the business sector for about 20 years, and I've now shifted and entered the non-profit sector, and it's quite interesting, and I think it's been quite eye-opening for me to kind of contextualize both aspects of corporate CSR, and I think it requires a paradigm shift for corporate foundations and CSR to think about collaboration in the sector rather than competition in the sector, because in a for-profit environment, it is about competition, it is about profits and things like that. Whereas, so we all had to kind of rewire our mindset being in the non-profit to say, hey guys, we should be collaborating. And I mean, you would know, you were also in the business before, and CSR typically is all about building goodwill and stakeholder relationships and things like that. So branding becomes something that is quite important in giving. And that requires a paradigm shift as well, so if organizations choose to do something or attach themselves to a mission, whether it's education transformation, whether it's environmental conservation, whether it's the promotion and mainstreaming of the arts, then work in collaboration, and let's try to find a way where branding doesn't get in the way, governance structures doesn't get in the way, and things like that. So I think I would say, honestly, this is work in progress. Since we came in the last 5 years, we've been promoting collaboration, and not just among private sectors, but also among civil society organizations. You'd be surprised, child advocate NGOs or women advocacy NGOs sometimes tak pernah sit in the same room to discuss the issues but it's the same stakeholder that you're talking to, it's the same public schools that you're going to provide input, right? So it is coming together, and I just wanted to say before you ask the next question is, you see that demonstrated so nicely during the COVID crisis. We had this network called the JLC Disaster Relief Network, and the JLC Disaster Relief Network was set up in 2013. And generally what happens is during a national crisis, macam floods or disaster lah, companies comes together and JLCs mobilizes their resources and work together with MKN and things like that. So it's like a informal loose coalition, but it comes together during a national crisis. And so it came together during COVID response, we had, so Yayasan Hasanah and TM is the secretariat for that, joint secretariat. And we had about 29 companies coming together to collaborate and work and support the Ministry of Health. You know, in the early days, we had PPE issues, ventilator issues, and things like that. And we all realized we didn't know how to procure medical equipment, right? Like, you know, it's technical and things like that. So I think it was an amazing example of collaboration where, and the speed in which decisions were made to collaborate and to pledge amounts of money. And we worked with Famaniaga to work with MOH to see where the help is needed so that we could use private sector resources to purchase those things and deploy to the hospitals as fast as possible. So I think as at end of May, the collective contribution was about 95 million ringgit from these 29 companies. And they were not just GLCs, we also had private sector companies coming in. So that's an amazing, I think an amazing example of how collaboration can work.
We will take a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk about the direct impact that you were speaking of just now when you build societies in terms of education, reskilling, and so on. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. I am with Shahira Ahmed Bazari, the trustee and the MD or Managing Director of Yayasan Hasanah. Shahira, we continue on our conversation into how you bring about direct impact towards the civil societies and the societies that you work with right now. You were touching a little bit earlier just now on re-education, reskilling, empowering them directly. If you can share some clear examples that people can see, the tangible results that come about from your work directly with those stakeholders?
Okay, just a little bit of stats first, Ibrahim. So since we were incorporated in 2015, we have funded about 100 projects. We've worked with about 63 civil society partner organizations and invested slightly more than 600 million in the last 5 years. And I just also wanted to say that some of our more popular flagship organizations include Yayasan Khazanah, which is our premier scholarship entity, which Hasanah funds, Khazanah Research Institute, which also have been doing a lot of excellent work in policy and timely research, as well as Think City, which is an urban regeneration entity. So these are part of our flagship initiatives. There are many things that that we are working on, and they're all at different stages. And you ask about some of the impact of our work. And it's quite hard to choose, but I'm going to give you a few examples. So one is initiative under the Trust School program, which is our public-private sector partnership dengan Ministry of Education. It's been 10 years, so it started even during the Khazanah days. And really, I think that is an excellent example of how private sector funding is used for R&D in ensuring better education outcomes in our public schools. So just quickly, the Trust School is anchored on 4 things. School leadership, so they work with teachers. Pedagogical intervention, so they look at how to use the same curriculum in the same school, but just teach differently. And then the third one is around community engagement. So it's school leadership, community engagement, pedagogy, and student potential, maximizing student potential, right? So these are the 4 things. And we said that if you use the same curriculum with the same teachers and review these 4 anchors, we could get better student outcome, right? So so that has been progressing quite well, and actually we're still working very closely with MOE, and they are already studying the outcomes of trust schools. We demonstrated it over 100 schools, and to be fair, not all 100 schools are funded by Khazanah and Yayasan Hasanah. We had other donors coming in as well, other GLCs and private companies. Currently, we are also doing a huge pilot in the state of Kedah. So what we're doing now is to work with the district officers and state officers in implementing and reviewing these 4 anchors of achieving better student outcome. So it's like a flip model. The 100 schools, we went directly to the schools, but the pilot that we're doing in Kedah is saying that we will now look at it from the officers to take it down to schools. So we're piloting it in all eight or 9 districts in Kedah. And that, I think, is a transformational work. And it's ongoing. You know, sometimes people say, oh, what did you achieve in a year? But this sector is not an annual achievement sector lah. You know, it is a long-term, impact-based. Things takes time, you know, to.
Yeah, but the people asking you are the people in for-profit entities, and therefore they work, you know, based on quarters, based on, you know, semi-annual yardsticks. It's very hard for them to, as you say, shift their mindset. Speaking about shifting mindsets, there's a lot of macro issues that I want to touch on, and you guys are actually deeply passionate about in some of your work. This include climate change, climate resilience, urban redevelopment. One of your entities that you speak of, Think City, actually have done a few shots or a few shoots in Think City, in you know, deep down KL, in Chowkit area there. There's a lot of macro issues that needs to be dealt with, and I fear that while you guys are deeply passionate about this, it's not you know, a single entity to be dealt with. You need the whole community to move along with you. For instance, climate change is going to be a big deal for everyone to deal with, but if you are the only guys looking at it, it's going to be a bit tough for you to impact change. How do you marry these macro, you know, SDG kind of things, Sustainable Development Goals kind of lofty ideals, with the day-to-day, the 9-to-5 job that you have in trying to get people to come along for the ride? How do you marry that kind of limitations with your organizations, with the macro goals that you want to solve?
Well, it's tough because you are dealing with multiple stakeholders. So first of all the stakeholders needs to be on the same page about the expectations and the challenges before you. I mean, you spoke about for-profit wiring, kita ni quarterly results, and you know,
we're saying it as if it's a some sort of illness.
Absolutely. So and I understand that, and I have a diverse board as well that speaks about this, right? And so I think the challenge is real, but I think if there is a good understanding about what real long-term social impact is, then it makes the job easier. It is not, I mean, on the for-profit, it's dollars and cents. You can't, I mean, whether you go up or down, but in the for-profit, it's human lives. It's the weather. It's like, how do you control these things? And people need to understand that some of these things takes time to achieve. But that's all fine. People have been doing this for a good 100 years in the non-profit, and there's some science to it in terms of how this can be achieved. But like you said, stakeholders needs to be aligned in terms of expectations and engagements. Now, just going back to driving real impact, and you know, in this sector, people love to use terms like, oh, you know, are you achieving scale? You know, you're doing so many little things, you know, are you really making a difference? And people love to talk about system change, like, you know, what's the point of doing all of this when the system or the regulations and the law? So everything that we do is sort of like bottom up. You need to still empower and educate the people, the grassroots level, but it's also top down in a lot of ways to make real impact happen, you know. And working with system is not the easiest, because we got changes. Just in the last few years, we've been working with different even ministers and ministry officials and things like that. So part of the, I know whether you want to say challenge or fun of the sector is that you got to manage different changes that is happening. But I am very hopeful and optimistic, because I think with the pandemic and just prior to that, the two biggest concerns around inequality and climate crisis, it's always been up there. And then now we have the pandemic as another layer, and then now we've got recession and economic turbulence as another layer. And people are starting to think deeply about purpose and roles in society, and even the role of business, and responsible business, and how can businesses play a more meaningful role. So it almost feels like a trend of corporate foundations going back to their company and saying, guys, we need to be holistic about this rather than just carving out some amount of money for you to go do good when the business continues as usual. So there are a lot of conceptual, and there's quite a lot of thinking that needs to go through. But if I bring it down to our own experience, I think we continue to soldier on. We continue to keep our purpose and our eye on the mission. I always say that, with everything, even with collaboration, when we talk to other partners, you have to always put the mission at the center of everything. If you're trying to get better student outcomes, then the student should always be in the middle of all deliberations and discussions, not the company and so on and so forth.
That's the idea that I'm coming at right now. You have two groups of people in a for-profit entity, even for entities like Khazanah Nasional. The one group is cynical. They are not appreciating the kind of work that the foundation does. In fact, they believe that their purpose in life is to be profitable. That group I don't want to deal with in our conversation. I want to deal with the second group. The group that feels your work. They appreciate what you do, but now is a time of crisis. Taking Khazanah out of the picture, we're talking about all the other businesses out there in the country, the 90% SMEs, the 10% GLCs, and funds out there, people like PNB and all the others. They really need to make a lot of cash for this year, not to be profitable, but to stay alive. And in their pursuit of doing so, they might want to take your work as a secondary thing. They might have to go forward and pursue for-profit goals even more so now than before. Given the situation that we are at now, and it's a very peculiar situation, we're not the only one going through it. This COVID-19 is impacting the whole world. Our big trading countries are more affected than we are. I'm talking about China, Singapore, America. Things are really not looking good for the business community. How do you balance with their need to be profitable with your work to continue on impacting positively towards the societies that you work with? How do you marry that kind of conflict?
Yeah, I think companies should continue to make money, because if there's no money, there's no corporate responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So companies should continue to do what they do best. It's just that how you do it should evolve to something that is a bit more responsible. And I think companies are already, because there's ESG, there's been sustainability, responsible business, shared value. There's been quite a number of those things, and many companies are adopting. Now, many companies have also allocated funding already for corporate responsibility. Like you said, one organization can't solve the whole problem. So I think that the non-profit, therefore, and big corporate foundations currently, we have quite a number now that has come through, need to think about, I always talk this thing on collaboration, Ibrahim. So, if I have 100 million annually, and Petronas have some amount of money, and Sandabi and CIMB and Telecom and all of these companies sit together and think about collaboration, then you achieve scale on this side, on the non-profit side. So I've spoken about the 5 C's in achieving impact, and one of the things is on collaboration, and we said that having a common mission and purpose. If you speak to 10 foundations currently in Malaysia, almost all of them is doing something on education.
Yeah.
Where's education?
You can almost all. I can guarantee you on this.
Yes, and all of them are in one of those 10,100 schools that are in the country.
Yeah.
So why can't we collaborate? Why can't we pool all of our money together and go big with that 10,000 schools? Instead of me doing 100 schools, you doing, but we can do a bit of that. But really, I think, and you talk about
But correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing malicious in this. Nobody is out trying to outpace each other. It's just that communication is a thing, lah. I mean, you work better on that collaboration.
And honestly, I do think that the sector is evolving so beautifully, really. Collaboration is happening. People are starting to understand the urgency of it. You know, the mindset of using corporate responsibility as part of your PR or as part of sort of like your goodwill is over, honestly. I think companies are being a lot more serious about their impact and what they can achieve. Yeah. So I was talking about the 5 C's, and the 5 C's, one, I think is collaboration. Definitely collaboration needs to happen more, and it is. I think it is. Second is capacity and capability. We can do more in supporting our civil society and social enterprises and NGOs in doing more in building their capacity and capability. Third is coordination. That's another thing we don't do very well, coordination and implementation. But I think if we align our resources in improving our coordination and implementation, we will achieve so much more. So actually the sector don't really need more money. We just need to collaborate and coordinate better. And then you probably get your 10x or whatever.
You're the first trustee to say that your organization doesn't need money. No. Other people will be begging.
You know, I go to global conferences, they don't like me now. And I said that.
We're okay, we're good. We just need to collaborate.
We're good, but honestly, if we fix a few things, we can go further. Yeah. Right? If we fix collaboration, if we fix coordination and implementation, if we fix capacity, if we connect the dots better, it will definitely take us a bit further. I mean, I can't remember the number now about how many $1 trillion is needed to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Okay. But that number, my hypothesis is that number can reduce a little bit if we fix some of these symptoms or problems that we have within the sector. And the final C is communications, right? So you got to tell people what is it that you're doing. You got to make people understand the problems that are happening in the ecosystem. So collaborate, build capacity, communicate, coordinate, and connect the dots. Connecting the dots is this 10,000 schools that I'm talking about, lah. You know, if all of us sit in the same room and talk about, hey, what are you doing? STEM, what are you doing? Literacy, what are you doing? You know, can we all, so if I have a proposal on STEM, can I send it to you? Because then I don't need to do STEM anymore and I can put my money somewhere else. Yeah. So it's just about coordination, you know. And really, I think that money that we currently have in the ecosystem can go further if we fix some of these things. I wouldn't say that we don't need money anymore, but I'm just saying that it could be better. Yeah.
The way you're describing things to me is that you're actually trying to do two things. First is, of course, bring about impact to the society, but second of all, trying to make sure that the environment that you guys work in is actually better. And I cannot imagine you doing this forever, but at least you're trying to leave a legacy where you're trying to improve the systems a bit. And that's highly commendable, because a lot of trustees that I speak to, either they don't want to acknowledge the kind of challenges that they're going through, not in terms of reaching out to the community, itu diorang pandai. The issue is on improving the ecosystem of the foundations, not just in Malaysia, but globally as well. And I think you're very honest in trying to approach that effort. Because of this, do you think that there will come a time and day when we actually will see the environment where foundations can operate optimally the way we see it in textbooks, the way we would learn how foundations work across the board? Do you think that we'll reach that goal one day?
Well, you're speaking to an optimist. So, hell yeah. Of course there will be. We got to be positive. And
anyway, it's a pleasant event talking to you. We'll definitely bring you in again. Definitely, you can bet on that. I really wish you all the best. I do hope that with the COVID-19 situation and the economic slump that we're going through right now is going to improve on your work even better. But we have to draw this conversation to a close. That was Shahira Ahmed Bazari, Trustee and Managing Director of Yayasan Hasanah. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. Also, you can learn and read more about Yayasan Hasanah. Shahira, where can they learn more about you guys?
So you could go to our website, yayasanhasanah.org, and our annual report is also up there. I mean, you could just Google Yayasan Hasanah, you'll see them all coming up, hopefully. And please follow us on our social media. I think one of the things is we want to get Malaysians. This is a journey for Malaysians for a better Malaysia.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Support every initiative that you see on the social and environmental side. So please follow us on our Instagram and Facebook as well, and give us your comments and feedback.
Of course. Okay, that's it from Yayasan Hasanah and from Shahira. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.